You see that thick red line appear on your flasher. It rises to meet your jig, it gets closer, and then it's gone. Sound familiar? We've all been there. We've all cursed the fish, the lure, the weather. But what if I told you that you didn't just fail to attract that fish? What if I told you that you actively scared it away? Today, we're talking about the thin line between a meal and a menace, and why your jigging motion might be screaming threat to every winter perch below you. By the end of this video, you'll understand the psychology of a cautious winter perch and see your own technique in a completely new light. We're going to expose the one common habit that turns your expensive tungsten jig into a fish-repelling monster. So be honest, have you ever blamed the lure when the fish just wouldn't commit? Let me know down in the comments.
For generations, we've heard the same advice for ice fishing. You've got to be aggressive to call them in, or rip it hard to trigger a reaction strike. We see it in videos, we hear it from the old-timers. It's easy to get impatient out there on the ice, staring at a frozen hole in the ground. So we start working that lure harder and harder, thinking that more action equals more attention. The problem is, we're thinking like fishermen, not like fish. A winter perch isn't an aggressive, warm water base looking to smash anything that moves. It's a cold, often lethargic creature trying to conserve energy. Its entire world is about calculating risk versus reward, and the habits many of us have developed over the years are creating a situation that is all risk and no reward for the fish. First, let's get inside the mind of a winter perch. The water is cold, its metabolism is slow, and food is scarce. It is not looking for a challenge or a fight. It is looking for the easiest, safest meal it can possibly find. Its primary goals are to conserve energy and avoid being eaten. When a perch sees something in the water, its first calculation isn't, can I eat that? It's, could that thing eat me? Or is it a competitor that's going to cause trouble? Understanding this defensive, energy-saving mindset is the absolute foundation for changing your approach. You have to stop thinking about triggering a bite and start thinking about presenting an opportunity that the fish simply can't refuse because it looks so incredibly easy and safe. Now think about your lure. Down there under the ice, your jig can only be one of two things in the fish's mind. It's either a small, vulnerable prey item like a freshwater shrimp, a bug, or a tiny, dying minnow. Or it's a competitor, a threat, or something so unnatural and erratic that it triggers alarm bells. There is very little middle ground. Every single movement you make with your rod tip sends a signal that pushes the lure into one of these two categories. The tragedy is that most anglers, with their aggressive rips and constant motion, are firmly placing their lure in the threat category, without even realizing they're doing it. They're essentially acting like a bully in the fish's living room and wondering why no one wants to come out and play. So what exactly does a threat motion look like from the fish's point of view? It's any movement that is too fast, too large, or too erratic for a natural prey item of that size. Think about those big 1-foot rips of the rod. Think about constantly shaking and bouncing the lure with no brakes. To a perch, this looks like a creature that is highly agitated, aggressive, and unpredictable. Small prey items in a cold water environment simply do not behave this way. They might dart a tiny bit, but then they pause, they drift, they quiver. They don't perform high-energy acrobatics. When your jig does, it breaks the illusion of being an easy meal and starts to look like another predator or a frantic, unknown creature to be avoided at all costs. Let's dig deeper into why this looks so threatening. A winter perch has evolved over millions of years to understand the body language of its environment. Small, vulnerable things tend to make small, subtle movements. They try to blend in. Aggressive, territorial, or predatory things make large, flashy, and assertive movements. They are trying to establish dominance or chase something. So when your tiny 1/8 ounce jig comes plummeting down and then starts violently jerking up and down, it's sending a deeply confusing and alarming signal. It has the size of food, but the body language of a foe. In the fish world, when you get mixed signals like that, the safest bet is always to flee. And that's exactly what you see on your flasher when that red line disappears. And we have to talk about vibration. Fish don't just see your lure, they feel it through their lateral line. This organ is incredibly sensitive to pressure changes and vibrations in the water. A gentle quiver or a small hop creates a subtle pulse, like a dinner bell, but a big, aggressive rip. That sends out a jarring, loud pressure wave. Imagine you're in a quiet library and someone suddenly screams. That's the effect it has. It's not an invitation, it's an alarm. It puts every fish in the area on high alert. Instead of calmly coming in to investigate a potential meal, they are now on the defensive, wondering where the danger is coming from. And more often than not, they decide the danger is coming directly from your strange, screaming lure. Okay, so if that's the threat, what does the meal motion look like? It's all about subtlety. It's the complete opposite of what many of us were taught. The perfect meal motion consists of three main parts: very small hops, gentle quivers, and, most importantly, extended pauses. The hop might be just an inch or two, created by a tiny flick of the wrist. The quiver is even smaller, just a slight tremble of the rod tip generated by your fingers, making the jig look like it's barely alive. These movements imitate a small insect kicking or a minnow shivering in the cold. They are signals of vulnerability. They tell the perch, I am here, I am alive, but I am weak, and I am an incredibly easy meal for you. Let's focus on the most critical and most ignored part of the presentation, the pause. The pause is everything in winter jigging. It is the moment of truth. When you're jigging and hopping, the perch is often just watching, assessing the situation. It's when the lure stops moving and just hangs there, perfectly still and vulnerable, that the perch makes the decision to commit. An aggressive jigger is so focused on creating action that they almost never pause for more than a second or two. A truly effective perch angler will pause for 5, 10, even 15 seconds at a time. This gives the cautious fish time to approach, inspect, and finally decide to eat. The action gets their attention, but the pause gets the bite. Here's a great way to visualize it. Think about a tiny aquatic insect like a bloodworm or a scud in the water. It doesn't swim around like a speedboat. It doesn't do flips and tricks. It makes a tiny little kick, and then it drifts. It might wiggle a little bit, and then it sits still. That is the exact vibe you want to replicate with your jig. You are not a puppeteer trying to put on a big show. You are an actor trying to perfectly imitate a slow, stupid, and delicious bug. The next time you're out on the ice, close your eyes and picture that little insect. Then try to make your jig do exactly what you're picturing. I guarantee your movements will become 10 times smaller and 100 times more effective. Here's a hard truth: your rod tip is lying to you. Most anglers drastically overestimate how much they need to move their rod to get the right action. They'll lift their rod tip a foot, thinking the lure is coming up a foot. But with line stretch and the physics of it all, that lure is often launching upwards much more aggressively than intended. It creates a sudden, unnatural bolt towards the surface that spooks fish. The real magic happens with minimal input. A 1-inch twitch of the rod tip is all you need to make that jig dance. And this is where a high-quality rod with a sensitive tip becomes so important. It allows you to impart that subtle action and, more importantly, to feel when you're doing too much. The goal is to move the lure, not to launch it. So, what's the first practical step you can take? Consciously tune down the aggression. Make a commitment to do less. When you go out next time, Take your normal jigging stroke and cut it in half, then cut it in half again. Your goal should be a jigging motion that is so small, someone watching you from 10 feet away might not even see your rod tip moving. I'm serious, we're talking about movements of a few inches, maybe even just 1 or 2. It will feel wrong at first, it will feel like you're not doing enough to attract fish, but you have to trust the process. You are retraining your brain and your muscles to stop scaring fish and start feeding them. It's about finesse over force every single time. To take this a step further, you need to change where the movement comes from. Most anglers jig from their arm or their wrist. This produces those larger, sweeping motions that we've identified as a threat. The best perch anglers I know barely move their wrist at all. The motion comes from their fingers. They hold the rod lightly and simply tap it with their index finger or roll it between their thumb and forefinger. This creates an incredibly subtle, natural quiver and bounce that is impossible to replicate with your wrist. It's the difference between a sledgehammer and a surgeon's scalpel. By moving the action to your fingertips, you gain a level of precision that will let you perfectly imitate the most delicate movements of natural prey. It's also critical to understand that you must match your motion to your lure. This is a massive mistake I see all the time. A fisherman will use the exact same aggressive jigging stroke for a heavy 1/4 ounce spoon as they do for a tiny 1/32 ounce tungsten jig. A big, heavy spoon might need that larger lift to get the right flutter and flash on the fall. But if you apply that same motion to a tiny tungsten jig, you're just rocketing it up and down. That small jig is designed for subtlety. It needs just the slightest quiver to bring it to life. Using the wrong motion for your lure is like trying to play a violin with a drumstick. You have to adapt your technique to the tool you are using. Your electronics are not just for finding fish. They are your personal coach. Your flasher or graph is giving you instant feedback on every single thing you do. Pay close attention. Drop your lure down and start with an aggressive jigging motion. Now watch what happens when a fish approaches. Does it charge in and strike, or does it come in, hesitate, and then fade away? 90% of the time, it will be the latter. Now on the next fish, try something different. Once it appears on the screen, stop all aggressive movement, go completely still, and then impart just the tiniest quiver. Watch the fish's reaction now. You'll often see that red line get thicker and lock onto your lure. The fish is telling you exactly what it wants. You just have to be willing to listen. A key concept to master is the difference between a calling motion and a closing motion. It's perfectly fine to use a few larger, more aggressive rips when you first drop down a hole. You're trying to send out vibrations and flash to attract fish from a distance and get them to come investigate. This is the calling motion. However, the absolute second you see a fish appear on your sonar, the game must change completely. Your job is no longer to attract them. They are already there. Your new job is to convince them to eat. This requires an immediate switch to a closing motion, which is all about subtlety, finesse, and those tiny movements and long pauses we've been talking about. The failure to make this transition is probably the #1 reason anglers don't convert lookers into biters. Let's break down the best closing technique, the quiver. Once that perch is on the screen, looking at your bait, you've won half the battle. Now you need to make your jig look as vulnerable and alive as possible. The best way to do this is with a simple quiver. Hold the rod steady and just let it tremble slightly. You're not lifting or dropping the lure in the water column. You're just making it vibrate in place. This tiny, subtle shimmy makes the plastics or bait on your jig undulate seductively. It signals life, but it doesn't signal danger. It's a non-threatening movement that keeps the fish's interest locked on your bait, often drawing them in for that final, decisive bite. It's a game of inches and tremors. Another deadly closing technique is the slow rise. This one is for those fish that come in and just sit there, staring at your jig, unwilling to commit. After a long pause, instead of jigging, you begin to lift your lure, but you do it so slowly that the movement is almost imperceptible. You're just slowly, steadily raising your entire rod over the course of 5 or 10 seconds. To the perch, this looks like their potential meal is trying to escape. It triggers a predatory, possessive instinct. They feel like they are about to lose their easy meal, and they will often rush up and grab it before it can get away. It's a stealthy trick that works wonders on neutral or negative fish that won't respond to any other type of jigging. We need to debunk the reaction strike myth for winter perch. Now, does a hard, fast rip sometimes trigger a bite? Yes, absolutely, but it usually only works on highly aggressive fish in a feeding frenzy. For the other 99% of the fish, on any given day, the neutral, the curious, the negative fish, that aggressive rip is a panic button. It spooks them. The idea of surprising a fish into biting is a low percentage play in the cold water world. You will scare off 10 fish for every one you might trick into biting. A much more reliable strategy is to build the fish's confidence, to convince it that your lure is a safe, easy meal. Stop trying to force a reaction and start trying to earn their trust. Let's paint a picture we've all seen. You're out on a community spot, and you're marking a huge school of perch on your graph. You get excited and start ripping your jig up and down, trying to fire them up. You're working that lure like you're trying to start a stubborn lawnmower. And what happens? The school, which was a solid red blob on your screen, instantly breaks apart and vanishes. Meanwhile, your buddy, sitting 10 feet away, is icing fish after fish. You look over and his rod tip is barely moving. He's just holding it still with the occasional tiny twitch. He's not scaring them, he's feeding them. He understands the difference between a threat and a meal. That visual right there is the entire lesson in a nutshell. Finally, we can't ignore the role your equipment plays in all this. If you are using a short, stiff ice rod with no forgiveness, it's very difficult to impart subtle action. Every tiny movement of your hand is transferred directly and harshly to the lure. This is why so many expert perch fishermen use ultralight rods with very soft tips, or rods with a spring bobber. These tools act as a shock absorber. They allow you to see the subtle movements you are creating, and they help you create those delicate quivers without accidentally yanking the lure. Your gear can either help you or hurt you. If your rod is forcing you to be too aggressive, it's working against you, no matter how much it cost. And for the ultimate proof, look no further than the dead stick. How many times have you been actively jigging one rod with no luck, only to see your second rod, the one sitting perfectly still in a holder with a live minnow, suddenly bend over? It happens all the time. This is the final, undeniable evidence that perch are often looking for the easiest possible meal. A lure that isn't moving at all can often outfish a lure that is moving too much or in the wrong way. The dead stick proves that sometimes the absolute best motion you can give your lure is no motion at all. It's the ultimate pause. And it's a lesson that we aggressive jiggers need to take to heart. So, let's wrap this all up. We've established that the cold, cautious winter perch is not looking for a fight. It's looking for a safe, easy meal. And for years, many of us have been unintentionally doing the exact opposite, with fast, aggressive jigging that sends all the wrong signals. We've been presenting a threat, not food. The biggest takeaway, the real aha moment here, is this. The moment you see a fish on your screen, your job is no longer to attract it. Your job is to convince it, and you convince it with subtlety, with finesse, with long pauses and with tiny movements that scream vulnerable. This isn't just about catching one more fish. It's a fundamental shift in your approach from making them bite to letting them eat. It's a change from force to finesse, and I promise you, it will put more and bigger perch on the ice for you. Thanks for watching. If this challenged some of your old habits, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. We've got a lot more myths to bust. Now for my question to you, what's the most unfishy or subtle technique that has ever worked for you on the ice? Drop the story in the comments below. Let's all learn from each other.